Most people believe intelligence is about IQ, education, or how much information someone can recall. That belief is comforting and deeply misleading. Intelligence is not measured by what you know. It is measured by how aware you are of what is happening inside you and around you. The uncomfortable truth is this: most people are not unintelligent. They are unaware. They move through life reacting, repeating, and responding without ever realizing they are doing it. They confuse motion with thinking. They confuse opinion with insight. And because society rewards speed, confidence, and expression, this lack of awareness often goes unnoticed, even praised. This is why pawns believe they are thinkers. Society trains people to equate intelligence with credentials, degrees, titles, vocabulary, articulation, but none of these guarantee independent thought. You can be highly educated and still be mentally owned. You can be articulate and still be programmable. You can consume endless information and still never produce a single original insight. Information is not intelligence. Education is not intelligence. Confidence is not intelligence. Intelligence begins with awareness. Awareness of impulse, bias, emotion, and influence. And this is where the hierarchy begins. Level 1. Reactive intelligence. At the first level, intelligence is almost entirely reactive. People at this level live inside impulse. They feel first and think later, if at all. Their decisions are driven by emotion, pressure, and immediate reward or discomfort. When something triggers them, they respond instantly. Anger becomes action, fear becomes avoidance, pleasure becomes pursuit. They think in moments, not patterns. What feels good now is good. What feels bad now is bad. There is no pause between stimulus and response. No internal observer. No space for choice. This is not stupidity. It is untrained awareness. Reactive intelligence dominates modern life because it is constantly stimulated. Notifications, news cycles, social media, outrage, urgency. Everything is designed to provoke reaction, not reflection. And people who react quickly are easier to influence than people who pause. At this level, individuals believe they are thinking when they are actually responding. Their opinions change with mood. Their beliefs shift with pressure. Their sense of self fluctuates with validation or rejection. They are not choosing. They are being moved. This is the lowest level of intelligence, not because the people are incapable, but because they are unconscious of their own mechanics. They do not see the strings. They only feel the pull. Level 2. Socially programmed intelligence. The second level looks more sophisticated, but it is still controlled. Here, people no longer react purely on impulse. They think, but only within boundaries that have already been set for them. Their intelligence is socially programmed. They think about what is rewarded. They adopt beliefs that earn approval, status, or safety. They mirror the values of their environment. They repeat narratives that signal belonging. Their opinions are shaped less by observation and more by what sounds acceptable, respectable, or popular. Authority replaces awareness. At this level, people outsource thinking to institutions, experts, trends, ideologies, and group consensus. If enough people agree, it must be true. If an authority says it, it must be right. If dissent is punished, silence feels safer than thought. This is why consensus is so powerful and so dangerous. Consensus feels like intelligence because it feels shared. But shared belief is not independent thought. It is a coordinated agreement, and coordinated agreement is easy to manufacture. Socially programmed intelligence mistakes: familiarity for truth, repetition for validity, popularity for accuracy. These individuals often sound intelligent. They can argue well. They know the right language. They reference studies, experts, and moral frameworks. But when pressure is applied, their thinking collapses back into conformity. They do not defend the truth. They defend their position. This is why pawns at this level are often the most confident. They are supported by numbers. They feel safe inside agreement. And because they are not reacting impulsively like level 1, they believe they have transcended emotional thinking. They haven't. They have simply traded raw impulse for socially approved impulse. This is why pawns believe they are thinkers. They are thinking, but not independently. Their intelligence still belongs to something outside themselves: approval, authority, identity, tribe. The critical difference between a pawn and a thinker is not knowledge. It is self-observation. A thinker notices when emotion tries to hijack decision-making. A thinker notices when consensus replaces inquiry. A thinker notices when beliefs are inherited instead of examined. And this noticing changes everything. This is the moment awareness begins. Because awareness introduces distance. Distance between stimulus and response, belief and identity, pressure and action. And distance is where freedom starts. This leads us to the governing law of this level. Awareness begins the moment you stop mistaking reaction for thought. Once you see this, you cannot unsee it. You begin noticing how often people react instead of reason, how often they repeat instead of examine, how often intelligence is performed rather than practiced. And once you notice it in others, you begin noticing it in yourself. That is the real beginning of intelligence. There is a stage where people become smart, yet remain controlled. They can reason, they can debate, they can analyze problems faster than most, and still, they are predictable. This is the level where intelligence becomes dangerous, not because it is powerful, but because it feels powerful, while still serving forces outside the self. Logic alone does not create freedom. In fact, logic without self-control often creates the most useful pawns of all, because clever people execute systems efficiently without questioning who the system serves. Before we go deeper into the hierarchy of intelligence and awareness, tap like and hit subscribe. Because what comes next exposes the difference between people who think and people who are simply being moved. Let's move on to the next level. Level 3, analytical intelligence. At this level, people can reason logically. They can identify cause and effect. They can break problems into parts and solve them methodically. They perform well in structured environments because they understand rules, processes, and optimization. This looks like intelligence, and it is. But it is incomplete. Analytical intelligence focuses on problems, not patterns. It asks, how do I solve this? Instead of, why does this exist? It improves systems without challenging incentives. It fixes errors without examining design. And most importantly, it often remains emotionally reactive. When pressure appears, logic collapses into defense. When identity is challenged, reason becomes justification. When stakes rise, analysis is quietly hijacked by emotion. This is why highly analytical people can still be manipulated. They assume logic protects them. But emotion still decides when logic is applied and where it is ignored. Manipulators understand this. They do not argue logic. They trigger emotion first, then let logic rationalize the reaction afterward. Analytical thinkers are valuable to power structures because they execute instructions efficiently. They optimize processes. They improve outcomes. But they rarely ask who benefits long-term. They solve problems inside the game. They do not question the game itself. This is why analytical intelligence alone does not produce autonomy. It produces competence, often in service of someone else's agenda. Level 4. Opinionated intelligence. Level 4 looks like independence, but it isn't. At this stage, people begin thinking for themselves. They form opinions. They challenge authority. They reject consensus. They speak loudly and confidently about what they believe. But expression is not power. Opinionated intelligence confuses having a stance with having control. These individuals argue instead of observe. They react to disagreement with escalation. They equate visibility with influence. Their thinking is independent, but noisy. Noise creates predictability. When someone always needs to respond, correct, or express, their behavior becomes easy to anticipate. Their identity becomes tied to being right. And once identity is tied to opinion, manipulation becomes simple. Trigger the opinion. Threaten the identity. Control the response. This is the danger of intellectual arrogance. Believing you are immune to influence makes you easier to influence. You stop observing yourself. You stop noticing when emotion enters reasoning. You defend positions instead of refining perception. Opinionated intelligence often feels empowering because it resists control openly. But open resistance is still reactive. It still moves when pushed. Manipulators love opinionated thinkers. They are loud. They are predictable. They self-expose constantly. They reveal priorities, triggers, and emotional investments in every argument. And arguments are fertile ground for leverage. This is why clever pawns are the most useful pawns. They believe they are thinking freely while unknowingly supplying information. They mistake expressions for independence. They mistake debate for dominance. The trap shared by levels 3 and 4. Both analytical and opinionated intelligence share a critical weakness: lack of self-control. They can think, but they cannot contain. They can reason, but they cannot withhold. They can analyze, but they cannot pause. Without containment, intelligence leaks. Leaked intelligence becomes exploitable. Self-control is the missing upgrade, not suppression, not silence for its own sake, but the ability to choose when and how thought becomes action. This is where the addiction to being right must be broken, because you need to be in the right places to control outside yourself. It ties your stability to external validation. It forces a reaction. It invites challenges. Here is the internal shift that begins real independence. You stop needing to respond immediately. You stop needing to convince. You stop needing to display intelligence. You begin observing incentives instead of arguments, patterns instead of opinions, behavior instead of words. This is the affirmation point, not spoken aloud, but internalized. I do not need to prove my intelligence. I do not need to react to disagreement. I choose when thought becomes visible. This restraint is what separates thinkers from pawns, and it leads us to the governing law of this level. Intelligence without self-control still serves someone else's agenda. Until intelligence is paired with restraint, it remains usable by external forces. It can be redirected, provoked, and exploited. In the next part, we cross the threshold where thinking becomes seeing, where patterns replace opinions, and awareness begins to shape outcomes instead of reacting to them. There is a moment where intelligence stops sounding like thought and starts looking like vision. This is the shift from thinking to seeing. Most people think inside stories. They react to events as isolated moments. Strategists see patterns beneath those moments. They don't ask what just happened. They ask what is forming. Real intelligence is pattern recognition. When you see patterns, surprise disappears, emotion quiets, urgency fades. You are no longer pulled into the drama of the present because you recognize its structure. This is why silence and observation elevate cognition. Noise blinds, speed distracts, stillness clarifies. At this level, intelligence stops chasing answers and starts reading incentives. Level 5. Strategic intelligence. Strategic intelligence thinks in systems, not events. Events are noisy, systems are stable. The strategist understands that outcomes are rarely caused by a single action. They are the result of incentives interacting over time. Instead of reacting to what someone says, the strategist watches what they do repeatedly. Instead of responding to pressure, they wait to see what the pressure is designed to produce. This is why strategists control timing. They know when to move, and more importantly, when not to. They allow others to act first, to reveal priorities, impatience, and leverage. Timing becomes a tool. Delay becomes information. Silence becomes a test. Strategic intelligence anticipates outcomes because it studies trajectories. It notices escalation patterns, dependency loops, and the way power shifts when resources change. It doesn't get pulled into arguments because arguments obscure incentives. It doesn't rush decisions because speed benefits the party creating urgency. This level marks the end of pawn-level cognition. Pawns react to events. Strategists read the board. They don't ask, "How do I respond?" They ask, "What happens next if I do nothing?" And that question changes everything. Level 6. Emotional intelligence, weaponized. At level 6, emotional intelligence stops being about empathy and starts becoming leverage. This is not about suppressing emotion. It is about understanding emotion without being ruled by it. The individual reads emotional currents the way a sailor reads wind, not to be pushed by it, but to navigate through it. Weaponized emotional intelligence reads people without reacting. It notices micro-shifts in tone, pacing, posture, and energy. It recognizes when friendliness is strategic, when anger is performative, when guilt is being introduced as a lever. And because reaction is absent, the emotional tactic collapses. Calm becomes leverage here. When others escalate emotionally and you do not, hierarchy forms. The calmer nervous system becomes the reference point. The emotionally reactive person begins adjusting, explaining, justifying, softening, or intensifying, all of which reveals intent. This is why silence is so powerful at this level. Silence is not absence. It is pressure without aggression. It forces others to regulate themselves. They speak more. They show more. They expose motivations. Weaponized emotional intelligence never rushes to reassure. It never rushes to clarify. It allows ambiguity to do the work. Seeing incentives instead of narratives. This is the defining upgrade of levels 5 and 6. Most people are controlled by narratives. Stories about fairness, stories about intention, stories about emotion. Narratives feel meaningful, but incentives are what move behavior. Strategists watch incentives. Who benefits if I agree quickly? Who loses if I wait? What behavior is being rewarded? What behavior is being punished? Once you see incentives, manipulation becomes obvious. Emotional appeals reveal their function. Pressure exposes its goal. Flattery shows its price. And because you are observing rather than participating, you are no longer inside the trap. Identity transition. From participant to observer. This is the internal shift that separates thinkers from operators. You stop experiencing interactions as something happening to you. You begin watching interactions as systems unfold around you. Emotion no longer drags you into reaction. Thought no longer needs expression. Observation becomes the default. You participate selectively. You speak deliberately. You move when the advantage is clear. You remain still when others rush. This detachment does not make you cold. It makes you precise. And precision creates power without noise. This brings us to the governing law of this level. Whoever sees patterns controls outcomes. Once you see patterns, you are no longer surprised. Once you are no longer surprised, you are no longer reactive. And once you are no longer reactive, you cannot be moved easily. There is a tier of intelligence where effort drops and impact multiplies. At this level, people stop trying to convince, explain, or overpower. They shape outcomes by shaping perception. This is why elite thinkers say less and influence more. They understand a simple truth most never reach. Whoever controls how a situation is seen, controls how it unfolds. Power operates invisibly here. The loud try to persuade. The elite adjust the lens. Level 7. Psychological intelligence. Psychological intelligence is the ability to see motives beneath words. Most people listen to what is said. This level listens for why it is being said. Tone, timing, pressure, and omission become more informative than content. You stop debating statements and start decoding incentives. At this level, manipulation is anticipated before it is attempted. You recognize guilt before it's applied, urgency before it's justified, flattery before it's offered. Because you see the move coming, you do not need to resist it. You simply don't step into it. Framing becomes the primary tool. Framing is the context that gives meaning to information. Change the frame, and the same facts produce different reactions. Psychological intelligence controls the frame without arguing the facts. It answers a question with a pause. It responds to pressure with neutrality. It allows assumptions to stand when correcting them would give leverage to the other side. This is why elite thinkers do not rush to clarify misunderstandings. Clarification too early often strengthens the wrong frame. They wait until the frame favors them, or they let the misunderstanding reveal intent. Psychological intelligence understands that people reveal themselves most when they think they are steering. So it steps back. It lets others talk. It lets others escalate. It lets others explain. Each word adds data. By the time a response is chosen, the outcome is already tilted. Level 8. Perceptual intelligence. Perceptual intelligence goes one level higher. It does not just read frames, it creates them. At this tier, influence becomes indirect. You do not persuade people what to think. You shape what they notice. You decide what feels obvious. You influence the starting point of interpretation. This is why perceptual intelligence often looks like passivity. In reality, it is orchestration. Silence here is strategic. Timing is calculated. Presence becomes a signal. You arrive late. You leave early. You speak once. You allow others to fill the space. Their reactions adjust to you, not the other way around. Perceptual intelligence controls narrative without speaking, because narrative follows contrast. When you do not mirror emotion, others feel exposed. When you do not compete, others overextend. When you do not chase approval, others seek alignment. Movement becomes indirect. You don't tell people what to do. You place conditions where their best option aligns with your outcome. This is the highest form of influence. Outcomes that feel self-chosen by others. Why power is invisible at this level. Visibility invites resistance. Force creates opposition. Direct persuasion triggers defense. Elite cognition avoids all three. Power here is subtle because subtlety preserves advantage. It leaves no obvious target, no statement to argue, no position to attack. By the time others realize influence occurred, behavior has already changed. This is why most people never reach this tier. It requires restraint over expression, observation over opinion, timing over speed. It requires giving up the need to be seen as intelligent in exchange for being effective. Most people want credit. Elite thinkers want results. They are willing to be underestimated because underestimation lowers resistance. They are willing to be quiet because quiet reveals others. They are willing to wait because waiting clarifies leverage. This is intelligence that shapes reality, not by pushing against it, but by guiding its flow. If this is shifting how you see reaction, programming, and real intelligence, tap like and hit subscribe. Your support matters because it helps this message reach people who are ready to stop performing intelligence and start mastering self-command. Let's move on to why this tier is rare. Levels 7 and 8 demand emotional discipline most people never cultivate. The ego wants recognition. The nervous system wants certainty. Society rewards expression. All of these push against perceptual mastery. To reach this tier, you must tolerate ambiguity. You must allow silence to do work. You must trust observation over reaction. And you must accept that the strongest influence often leaves no signature. This leads us to the governing law of this level. Control perception, and effort becomes unnecessary. When perception is controlled, arguments end before they begin. Resistance fades. Outcomes align without force. There is a final level of intelligence that does not look impressive from the outside. It does not argue better. It does not dominate conversations. It does not rush to prove itself. And yet, it quietly outperforms every other form of intelligence because it governs the source of all behavior, the self. This is where intelligence stops competing with the world and starts commanding itself. At this tier, restraint becomes power. Most people believe intelligence means speed, fast thinking, fast answers, fast reactions. Elite minds move in the opposite direction. They slow down internally. They create space between impulse and action. They understand that every unchosen reaction preserves leverage, while every impulsive response gives it away. This is why the highest intelligence looks calm under pressure. Pressure reveals hierarchy. When stress rises, most people leak information. Their tone shifts. Their body tightens. Their urgency shows. Elite minds remain stable. That stability becomes the signal others adapt to. This is not emotional suppression. It is an emotional command. Level 9. Meta-intelligence. Meta-intelligence is the ability to think about thinking while it is happening. Instead of being carried by thoughts, the individual observes them. Instead of being fused with emotion, they notice it arise and choose whether to act on it. Bias is detected in real time. You notice when fear is steering logic. You notice when pride wants to respond. You notice when approval is pulling you toward speech. And because you notice, you are no longer compelled. Meta-intelligence introduces choice. Choice between reacting now or waiting. Choice between speaking or letting silence work. Choice between correcting perception or allowing time to reveal truth. This is where most people fail. They experience thoughts as commands instead of suggestions. Elite minds experience thoughts as data. Data can be used, ignored, or deferred. This level transforms intelligence from a tool into a system. You stop identifying with every idea. You stop defending every position. You stop needing to resolve every tension immediately. This detachment creates clarity. Clarity reduces error. Reduced error increases effectiveness. Effectiveness compounds quietly. Level 10. Sovereign intelligence. Sovereign intelligence is the final separation. At this level, the mind becomes completely self-directed. External pressure no longer dictates internal movement. Praise does not inflate. Criticism does not destabilize. Fear does not rush decisions. Urgency does not compress judgment. This mind becomes the reference point. Others adjust their pace to it. Others regulate themselves around it. Others seek alignment rather than control. Not because the sovereign mind demands authority, but because it radiates stability. Sovereign intelligence is unreachable emotionally. Unreachable does not mean disconnected. It means ungovernable. This mind cannot be guilted into compliance. It cannot be flattered into exposure. It cannot be intimidated into reaction. Because reactions are no longer automatic. Silence becomes a tool here, not as avoidance, but as authority. Patience becomes leverage. Timing becomes dominant. When you choose when to act, you control how outcomes unfold. This is why powerful minds often appear slow, but arrive first. They do not chase clarity. They let clarity come to them. They understand that most people expose themselves through impatience. They allow others to speak, escalate, explain, and justify. By the time the sovereign mind responds, the interaction has already resolved in its favor. Thinker versus pawn, crystallized. This is where the separation becomes permanent. Pawns are moved by pressure. Thinkers move with intention. Pawns react to emotion. Thinkers observe emotion. Pawns need validation to stabilize. Thinkers stabilize themselves. Once self-command is achieved, intelligence no longer leaks. It accumulates. Presence replaces persuasion. Consistency replaces argument. The sovereign mind does not need to announce intelligence. It is felt. People sense it in pauses, in restraint, in timing. They sense that pushing will fail, that rushing will be ignored, that manipulation will be seen before it lands. This is not dominance through force. It is dominance through unreachability. Now, the hierarchy is complete. You are no longer trying to think better than others. You are no longer trying to appear intelligent. You are no longer trying to win exchanges. You are commanding yourself. And when you command yourself, the world adjusts. This is the governing law that closes the protocol. The highest intelligence is self-command. Everything beneath it is incomplete. Knowledge without restraint leaks. Logic without regulation reacts. Strategy without patience overextends. But self-command integrates all levels into one stable core. You do not rush. You do not react. You do not chase. You choose. That is the difference between a pawn and a thinker. And once crossed, it cannot be undone. If this protocol showed you why awareness is the real beginning of power, tap like and hit subscribe, and comment this below. I choose awareness over reaction. Because once you see what's moving you, you stop being a pawn and start becoming a thinker.